When 12-year-old James Herman Jr. and 13-year-old Lucille Herman walked through their front door after school at 3:30 p.m. on February 3rd, 1958, they received the most bizarre five-gun salute. The caps of bottles located in various rooms of the suburban Long Island home began to pop like champagne corks. Scurrying from room to room, Mrs. Herman and her two children found that a bottle of bleach in the basement had blown its top. In the kitchen, they located an uncapped bottle of liquid starch. The bathroom yielded both an uncapped bottle of shampoo and a topless bottle of liquid medicine. Mrs. Herman also discovered that a bottle of holy water she kept in the master bedroom had been spilled. Mrs. Herman called her husband James and reported the strange poppings that had occurred in their house. Mr. Herman was puzzled, but since no one had been hurt by the peculiar event, he decided that he would not come home any earlier than was his custom. James Herman arrived home with a solution already fixed in his mind. Some chemical reaction in the formulas of the various products had caused them to erupt. The fact that the bottles had all popped at once was undoubtedly due to some weird coincidence and probably had resulted from excessive humidity or some such thing in the house. He was baffled, however, when he noted that each of the bottles had screw caps, which required several turns before they could be removed. If the bottles had had the crimped caps commonly used on soda pop bottles at that time, his theory would have seemed much more valid. It seemed quite impossible that a chemical reaction could have blown off the screw caps without taking along the bottle's necks as well. He was relieved when his family gave every indication of having calmed down and no longer seemed to demand an explanation of the events from him. There were no other disturbances in the Herman household until 2 days later. Then it was a repeat performance of the poltergeist debut. The children walked in the front door from school and the fireworks began. A bottle of nail polish popped open, and so did a bottle of rubbing alcohol, a bottle of bleach, starch, detergent, and once again the holy water. All the caps were of the screw-on variety. When the bottles began to pop on the next night as well, James Herman began to suspect that his science fiction loving son had somehow hatched a little plot whereby he might have some fun at the expense of his family. Here's a photograph. The caption reads, in 1952, the Glynn family of Runcorn, Cheshire, United Kingdom, suffered the exploits of a nasty poltergeist that would wreck entire rooms. The police even attempted to set traps around the home to prevent further abuse, but the attacks continued. In this photograph, John Glynn surveys his wrecked bedroom. Herman conjectured that James Jr. could have dropped some type of carbonate capsule into the bottles and loosened their lids in the morning before he left for school. He had probably succeeded in timing the explosion so he could be present to witness the startled expression on the face of his mother and sister. Herman spent most of that weekend surreptitiously observing his son. He was determined to catch the boy in some action that would give him away as the agent behind the mysterious poppings. No one, therefore, could have been more surprised than Herman when, on Sunday morning, several bottle caps popped off and their containers began to jiggle on the shelves. He had kept an eye on the boy day and night. He could have slipped anything into the bottles. Oops, let's read that again. How could he have slipped anything into the bottles? James Jr. stood at the bathroom sink, brushing his teeth, and vigorously proclaimed his innocence. As Herman questioned his son, he was startled to see a medicine bottle move across the sink top and smash into the floor. Within seconds, it was joined by a bottle of shampoo. James Herman called the police, begging the officer who answered to take him seriously. They were being bothered by bottles that popped their caps and flew about the room. The officer accused Herman of drinking, but he agreed to send a policeman to investigate the disturbances. Herman had a good reputation in the community. It wasn't like him to annoy the police with wild stories. Patrolman James Hughes had only been in the house a few minutes when several bottles in the bathroom fired a barrage at him. He rapidly concluded that the Hermans did indeed have very peculiar trouble. Detective Joseph Totsi listened to Hughes's report with professional interest and concluded that if bottles were acting up at the Hermans, they were doing it with human help. Detective Totsi began his investigation on February 11th. On that day, an atomizer in Lucille's room tipped over when no one was in her bedroom, or Detective Totsi noted somewhat skeptically, no one claimed to have been in the bedroom. For the next few days, the disturbances were confined to the bottle of holy water in the parents' bedroom. On the evening of February 15th, however, the manifestations became much more impressive. As the family sat watching television, a porcelain figurine was lifted from a coffee table and began to float through the air. After this demonstration of prowess on the part of their uninvited guests, the Hermans decided to call upon a priest to aid Tootsie in his investigations. Father William MacLeod of the Church of St. William the Abbot answered their plea for clerical help and administered a blessing to the home by sprinkling holy water liberally in 6 rooms. But the priest was too late. Popper, as the strange force in the Herman house had come to be called, had grown too strong to have its spark of psychic life extinguished by holy water. The Hermans soon discovered that the invasion of privacy that began to occur when the news media gave their strange house a great deal of publicity was much worse than the Poppers' antics. Letters in barely intelligible scrawls arrived, either condemning them for fraud or encouraging them to take heart and fight against the evil tricks of Satan. And here's another photograph. The caption reads, "A still taken from the classic movie Poltergeist." On February 19th, a porcelain figure flew off a table and traveled more than 12 feet in the air before it smashed against the deck. On February 20th, another figurine became airborne. A bottle of ink popped its cap and splashed its contents against the wall, and a sugar bowl took its leave from the dining table. 17 days after its arrival, Popper was steadily acquiring the strength to perform more dramatic and more spectacular demonstrations. The Hermans, who had remained remarkably calm and patient throughout the phenomena, decided they needed to get away from the house before their nerves gave out. While they spent the night of February 21st with relatives, Detective Tootsie stayed in the house that Popper had taken over with its infantile pranks. Although Totie's attitude toward paranormal manifestations had altered considerably from the first night that he had spent with the Hermans, it didn't bother him in the slightest to remain alone in the haunted house. The night was quiet and without incident. There were no poppings, no moving of furniture, no flying figurines. The truce at the Herman house ended on the night that the family returned. Once again, the sugar bowl became so animated that it shot off the table and crashed to the floor. On February 24th, Tootsie investigated a loud thud that had come from James Jr.'s room. The officer was certain that no one had been in the room or near it, but upon entering the bedroom, he found that a heavy bureau had been tipped face down on the floor. The next night, the boy's phonograph began to orbit around the room while he was doing his homework. In the master bedroom, a statuette of the Virgin Mary flew more than 12 feet and struck the frame of a mirror across the room. A bookcase full of bulky encyclopedias was upended. A globe of the world shot down a hallway, narrowly missing Tootsie. A photographer saw his own flashbulbs rise from a table, float across the room, and bounce against the wall. For the first time, Popper began to knock on the wall, but no attempt at any sort of communication was attempted. Tootsie was worried about the sudden flurry of violent activity on the part of Popper. Tootsie had previously arranged for the house to be checked by electricians and physicists in order to find a logical explanation for the events. Even the Air Force had investigated to determine whether or not jet flight patterns might have somehow caused supersonic vibrations. He had taken the advice of occultists, self-styled preachers, anonymous letter writers. Any plan that seemed remotely plausible. He had tried to apply to the Herman household, but nothing had worked. The manifestations seemed to be growing in strength and were becoming increasingly violent in their demonstrations. Just as the detective was about to recommend that the family move to avoid personal harm, it seemed as though Popper had used up his last reserves of energy during the recent flurry of activity. The poltergeist said its farewell at 10 o'clock on the evening of March 2nd. It sent a dish shattering in the dining room, a night table falling in James Jr.'s bedroom, and a bookcase tumbling in the basement. With this parting gesture, Popper left the Hermans, never again to return. Thanks for listening.